Today, we're going to tackle a huge topic, but it's one that literally affects every single part of our lives. We are going to break down the architecture of government. Yeah, think of it like that. We're going to be the architects for a little while, looking at the blueprints of a modern state, right from the foundation up. We'll check out the core structures, the support beams, and all the safety features that are supposed to make it work for us. Why? Well, because understanding how it's built is really the first step to being a part of it. All right, let's jump right in.
I mean, it's one of those questions that sounds super simple, right? But the answer? It's incredibly complex, and it shapes, well, everything. The roads you drive on, the safety of your food, your right to speak your mind, even how private your phone is. All of that is shaped by this invisible machine we call government. We hear the word 1,000 times a day, but what is that machine actually made of? What are its gears, its levers, its core components? That's exactly what we're going to map out today. So when you boil it all down, a government is basically a tool, a really, really powerful one. I like to think of it as the operating system for a country, right? It's the platform that lets millions of people live together and hopefully do well. And just like the OS on your phone, it has these core functions. It's supposed to provide security, manage resources, and let people communicate and do business. Those public policies are kind of like the apps running on the OS. Healthcare, education, defense, and authority, that's the processing power that makes it all run. But as we all know, not all operating systems are created equal.
Okay, so to get our heads around this complex OS, here's our game plan. We're going to start with the most basic question. What's the whole point of government anyway? Then we'll build its three main pillars of power. After that, we'll look at the whole spectrum of who can be in charge. We'll dive deep into the many, many faces of democracy, and we'll finish up with a super practical checklist for what a modern democracy really needs to function.
All right, so let's kick things off with that big why. I mean, why have societies all over the world throughout all of human history felt the need to create governments? If you strip away all the laws and the politics, it really comes down to solving one fundamental problem of just living together in a big group. And that's really it. It's the agreed-upon way for a huge bunch of people to make choices together that everyone has to stick to. I mean, think about the alternative. Without it, you'd have what philosophers called a state of nature, which is basically chaos. Every person for themselves, no one to build the roads or deliver the mail or protect you. So government is the tool we invented to provide public goods. All the stuff we need that we can't possibly create on our own. It's the basic framework for an organized society. But how do you build that powerful framework so it doesn't just collapse on itself, or worse, become a tool of oppression? Well, this brings us to one of the most brilliant ideas in the entire history of politics, the separation of powers. See, early thinkers figured out that putting all the power of the state into one person's hands or one group's hands was basically a recipe for disaster and tyranny. So what was the solution? Split the power up. Divide it into three distinct independent branches. You can think of them like the three legs of a stool. If one leg gets too long or too short, the whole thing gets wobbly and tips right over. Each one is absolutely essential for balance. So first up, you've got the legislature. These are the planners, the architects. This is your parliament, your Congress, your assembly. Their main job is to represent what the people want by debating, writing, and creating the laws of the land. They're the ones drawing up the blueprints for how society should run, from setting the national budget to figuring out the rules of business. And in a lot of countries, this branch is actually split in two, like a House and a Senate, just to add another layer of review and make sure the laws are really thought through. Next, we have the executive branch. These are the doers, the construction crew that gets the job done. This branch is usually led by a president or a prime minister, but it's so much more than just one person. It's the entire vast machinery of the state. All the government departments, the civil service, the police, the military, their job is to take the laws that the legislature passed and actually put them into action. They handle the day-to-day business of running the country, everything from foreign policy to collecting taxes. They execute the plan. And finally, we get to the third leg of the stool, the judiciary. You can think of them as the impartial referees. This branch is made up of courts and judges, and their critical role is to interpret the laws and make sure they're applied fairly to everyone. They settle disputes, whether it's a simple disagreement over a contract or a major criminal case. But most importantly, they make sure that everyone is following the rules. And that includes the other two branches, the legislature and the executive. They are the guardians of the rulebook itself. Now here's where it gets really clever. These three pillars aren't just separate. They're locked in this constant dynamic power struggle called checks and balances. This is the absolute core defense against any one branch getting too powerful. So, for example, the legislature can pass a new law, right? But the executive leader, the president, might veto it and say, no, not happening. But then the legislature might get enough votes to override that veto. And just when you think it's over, the judiciary can step in and declare the whole law unconstitutional, striking it down completely. See? Each branch has a specific power to limit or check the power of the others. It's this brilliant system of tension that keeps everything in balance. Okay, so we've built the basic structure of a state. We've got our three pillars, but that brings us to the next and maybe the most important question of all. Who gets to control that structure? Who's actually in charge? Well, we can classify pretty much every government on Earth along a simple spectrum, and it's all based on the answer to that one question. So, on one far end of the spectrum, you have systems where all the power of the state is legally in the hands of a single person. And this isn't just about being a strong leader. It means the entire government machine answers to the will of just one individual. Think of an absolute monarch from the history books or a modern-day dictator. Okay, now move a little ways down the spectrum. Here, you've got systems where power isn't held by one person, but by a small elite group. Now, this ruling group could be the richest families in the country, the top military generals, the leaders of a single political party. The key thing is that power is exclusive, and it's held by a tiny, privileged minority. And finally, all the way at the other end of the spectrum, we get to democracy. In this system, the ultimate power, what the experts call sovereign power, is supposed to rest with the citizens themselves. I mean, this is a truly revolutionary idea. It means that authority doesn't flow down from a king or a ruler. It flows up from the people. The only reason a government has the right to rule is because the people have given them their permission to do so. Okay, so now let's zoom in on that third category, rule by the people. Because even though it's this ideal that so many countries aim for, democracy is definitely not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. It's become the most common form of government, sure, but it shows up in all these different flavors with different priorities and different ways of working. And understanding these differences is really key.
So the type of democracy most of us think of first is political democracy. And this itself comes in two main forms. You've got direct democracy, where citizens vote on laws and policies themselves. This is pretty rare in big countries today, but it's famously practiced in Switzerland, where they have referendums all the time. But the much more common model is representative democracy. This is where we, the people, elect officials, like members of parliament or a president, to go and make decisions for us. We basically delegate our power to them for a limited time.
But the whole idea of democracy doesn't have to stop at the voting booth. For example, social democracy argues that for a country to be truly democratic, it needs a certain level of social equality. So it uses government to make sure everyone has access to things like healthcare and education. Then you have industrial democracy, which takes these ideas into the workplace, pushing for things like strong unions and having workers represented on company boards. And economic democracy goes even further, trying to shrink huge wealth gaps by promoting things like employee-owned companies. It's all about applying that rule by the people idea to every part of society. But there is a much darker, twisted version of this. It's a chilling paradox known as totalitarian democracy. This is where a government actually comes to power through a democratic election, but then uses that very mandate from the people to systematically take democracy apart from the inside. They claim to represent the one true will of the people, and they use that as an excuse to crush anyone who disagrees, control the media, and get rid of their political opponents. It is a terrifying reminder that just having an election doesn't always guarantee a truly democratic result. So, with all these risks and different types, how can we tell a real, healthy, functioning democracy from one that's just, a democracy in name only? What are the essential ingredients you just have to have? Well, that brings us to our final section, the fundamental features, the absolute non-negotiables, the democratic checklist. These right here are the absolute cornerstones. You need a written constitution, which acts as the supreme law that even the government can't break. You have to have guaranteed human rights to protect people from the state. We already talked about how vital the separation of powers is. Freedoms of speech and the press are so critical because an informed public is the only real way to hold power accountable. And of course, the foundation of it all, universal adult suffrage, the right for every adult citizen to have their say, summed up in that powerful idea, one person, one vote. And finally, majority rule. But, and this is a huge but, a majority that's only considered legitimate because it was decided through regular, free, and fair elections. And honestly, this is the main takeaway from our entire discussion today. None of these principles on the checklist can work by itself. They form this interconnected system, this web of safeguards. You can't have real majority rule if people can't speak freely. You can't protect human rights if you don't have an independent judiciary. All of these pieces have to work together to do two main things: protect the freedom of the individual and make sure that the government stays accountable to the people it's supposed to serve. That right there is the true architecture of liberty.